everyone. Welcome to Medicine and Miracles. I'm your host, Dr. Scott McMahon. I've been a board-certified pediatrician for over 30 years. I've specialized in the diagnosis and treatment of CIRS medicine for over 15 years. CIRS is chronic inflammatory response syndrome. It's a mystery illness to many doctors, but it can affect any part of your body. I've evaluated over 2,000 patients. I've published 10 articles in the medical literature. I've co-written a CIRS medical textbook, given over 50 presentations at medical meetings, and have testified as an expert in 10 states and 2 other countries. But I'm also a man of faith. And I've followed Jesus for over 30 years. I'm an ordained minister. I've run a church or pastored a church. I've written a book on spiritual warfare, and I've been either in Mexico or overseas almost 20 times to do various kinds of missionary work. Now, this is Medicine and Miracles, and we're going to talk about medicine and science, but we're also going to talk about faith and some miracles that I've seen over the years. Some people think medicine and faith are not compatible subjects, but I'm going to show you that that's not correct. Medicine, miracles. Medicine and miracles. It's going to be great. So let's dive in. Now, have you ever wondered why planes fly or how they're able to fly? Today, we're going to look at the basic forces and aspects of flight that allow a plane to fly in a controlled manner. So first, we got to talk about air, because airplanes go through the air. Our air is 78% nitrogen and 21% oxygen at sea level. Now, there's a lower percent of oxygen as you go to higher and higher elevations. And that percentage comes down to its nitrogen atoms and oxygen atoms. And we've talked about those before. I believe that was in episode 14. And we know that those atoms actually have weight. Now, if you don't believe me that air has weight, then I suggest that you take a flat basketball and that you weigh it. And then you fill it up with air and you weigh it again. You're going to see that the basketball now weighs 2 or 3 pounds more because of the air that you put in. So air has weight. And that weight comes from these particles that we call atoms, like nitrogen, like oxygen. Now, air can create a force. You may not think about that, but let's say you're driving or you're a passenger in a car and you roll down the window and you put your hand out the window. Okay? And you let the air blow. So your hand is facing the same direction that you're traveling. The air comes against it and it pushes against your hand. That force we call drag. But if you were to take your hand and turn it just a little bit, angle it so that the top of your hand goes a little bit farther forward than the bottom of your hand, you still will feel the drag, not as much, and you'll feel your hand kind of lifting up. We call that second force lift. Okay? And the wings of an airplane are created so that you get that kind of lift. Now, you've got drag caused by the air pressure on an airplane that keeps it from moving forward. Okay? And you've also got friction. Friction is a force between the pavement and the wheels that keep the wheels from just sliding. So those keep the plane from moving in a forward direction. What keeps the plane from just rising up and floating? Well, that's gravity. And we talked about gravity in episode 13. Gravity pulls objects toward the center of the earth. So it keeps you from floating, and it keeps airplanes from floating too. Now, there are then these 3 forces, really 2, but 3 forces that keep the plane from moving. One is the drag and the friction, the drag, and then the friction from the ground keep the plane from moving forward. But you can overcome that by another force that's called thrust. And thrust you get from pushing air behind the plane. So some planes have propellers and they spin in such a way that the air gets pushed behind the airplane, and the airplane is on wheels. So that force going backwards pushes the plane forward. If you get enough thrust, you'll get speed. Other airplanes use jet engines, and they do the same thing. They push air, just a lot more efficiently. They push the air behind the plane, and again, with the wheels, that pushes the plane forward. So thrust can overcome the drag of the air and even the friction of the ground. And if you get enough thrust, then that air that's going underneath the wings, kind of like your hand when you tilted it forward, that air going underneath the wings will start giving the plane lift, and that lift will overcome the gravity. And now you're in the air, and the plane has gone from not moving to in the air. So if you get enough thrust, you'll get enough speed, which will create enough lift, which will cause the plane to go in the air. Pretty cool. Now you're flying. But how do you get down? Well, you have to have controls to do that. And there are three small parts of a plane that allow the plane three different types of motion. And as the pilot masters those different kinds of motion, he can control how the plane moves, whether it goes up or down, whether it goes left or right, and important things like that. Now, the first kind of motion is called roll, R-O-L-L, and it has to do with the relative position of the wings. So if one wing is up and the other wing is relatively down in position, then the plane is rolling to the left, and it'll cause you to turn to the left. Now, there's a small flap that is on the wings of each wing, and they're called ailerons, A-I-L-E-R-O-N-S. And typically, if one aileron goes up, the other one goes down. So one wing goes up, one goes down, and what that does is it creates a change in the amount of lift that each wing is getting. So one wing will be getting more lift than the other. And what happens as a result of that is one wing will go up, has more lift, and one wing will go down. And that causes the plane to start turning in the direction of the wing that's down. Isn't that cool? Okay. So that's one way of turning, or one motion. The second kind of motion is called pitch. And this refers to the relative position of the nose of the plane and the tail of the plane. Now, if the nose is a little bit higher up than the tail is, then that actually creates more lift and the plane ascends. Okay? And if you've ever been on an airplane, when you're landing and descending, you notice that the nose of the plane is down compared to the tail. And so it's angled like this. And that doesn't create extra lift. That's less lift, and you start to descend. There are pieces called elevators that are on the vertical stabilizer. Whew, that's a mouthful. If you've ever looked at the tail of a plane, you see that there's a part that goes upright, and then there's like a cross piece that goes to the right and to the left of the tail. Those two cross pieces are called vertical stabilizers, and they both have a flap on them that can pop up or go down. If they start going, and one is on the right side, one's on the left side, they work together. So if you put them both in the up position, then that causes the tail to go down, and that causes relatively speaking, the nose to go up, and you start ascending. And then the opposite if you want to descend. And then the final motion is called yaw, Y-A-W. If you've never been a pilot, you probably have never heard of yaw unless you're a physicist. Yaw refers to the relative positions of the nose and the tail, not in the up-down position like pitch does, but in the right-left kind of way, in the horizontal positions. So you have a rudder on the plane, and the rudder is attached to the tail, the upright portion of the tail. When the rudder gets turned, say, to the right, it changes the airflow around the tail, and it actually causes the tail to move relative to the nose. It causes it to move to the left. which then causes basically the whole plane to rotate a little bit. So now the nose is going more toward the right and the tail is going more toward the left. And that causes you to have made a turn because now you're, in essence, turning in the middle in the air. So pilots know these three forces and these three different instruments, and they use them to go up and to go down, to go left and to go right, and to make very fine changes in that. There are even more controls that make even finer adjustments, but we're not going to go through those today. Now, that's how planes fly in a controlled manner. Pretty cool, huh? So just as you can navigate in a plane, you can also navigate yourself to www.cirsx.com. You'll find a lot of free videos there about CIRS. You won't find a lot about flying planes, but you'll find more information about CIRS than just about anywhere else on the planet. And you can also find a list of trained treating professionals at www.survivingmold, or you can get direct to consumer services at www.moldco.com. And finally, for the ultimate learning experience, if you want to rub shoulders with the people that have created this science, who treat patients, who go into homes and inspect them or fix them, then www.cirsx.com and find out about the annual meeting, Surviving Mold CIRSX annual meeting in Tempe, Arizona from June 5th to June 8th, 2025. There's a discount code, DRSCOTT, Dr. Scott 10, Dr. Scott 10, no spaces, all caps, and you'll get 10% off the conference cost if you decide to go. Now, the miracle of flight is a testament to inquiring minds of humans. But this podcast serves to remind you that the defying miracles that still happen in everyday life. Now, in March of 2008, I had been divorced for about a year and a half. And I really thought that I was supposed to have more kids. And so I assumed that I was supposed to get married again. And I was seeing a wonderful woman. And we had been together for about 4 months. And to be honest, I set some ground rules on day one and allowed her to set some ground rules too. The ground rules I said was, I'm older. I'm in my mid-40s. I'm not here playing head games. I'm here to determine if you and I are supposed to get married or not. Yeah, I was that direct. And I also told her, I'm not going to kiss you until our wedding day. And I don't even know if I'm going to be allowed to marry you, because unless God tells me to marry you, I'm not going to marry you. I know that sounds kind of brutal, but again, why should I waste her time? Why should I waste my time? So, and I said to her, if you can't abide by those rules, so be it. That's okay. Maybe we should just stop talking and not have any kind of interaction. But she was okay with that. And like I said, about 4 months later, we were in love and everything was great until one night, well, I'm hanging out with her, and I heard God say very clearly in my head, she's not the one. Now, he never told me why she wasn't the one. I just heard that. And I went home that night, and I prayed it over for about a week. I kind of avoided her. We didn't get together. We didn't have long conversations. I prayed it through until I was absolutely sure, because I knew that if I broke up with her, it was going to break her heart. And it may seem harsh to break up with someone. We had never even had an argument, but I knew it would break her heart, but it was actually the kindest thing for me to do, because I wasn't going to marry her ever, since God told me not to. And so what would have been the point to continue seeing each other? It would just be wasting her time, wasting my time, giving her false hope that there might be another outcome. It's not the wise thing to do. So I knew I wasn't going to marry her against God's will, because that's a recipe for disaster. And even though I didn't know why God was going to end it, he ended it. And then I ended it. And the truth is, I think maybe it was because her destiny and my destiny were going in different directions, and maybe they didn't mesh. I don't honestly know. But anyway, this is a great place for me to stop and segue for a second and tell people that this is why you shouldn't have sex before you get married. It creates confusion. If you're trying to listen to God and his voice as to whether you're supposed to marry this person or not, is this the one or not, and you're having sex with them, that is like you making it impossible to hear God. If you're single and you're not having sex, then don't start. If your partner is pressuring you to have sex and you don't want to, I'm just going to tell you, dump them. You deserve better than that person, because the whole point of this miracle is that if you let God work, you can have the very best spouse that God has on earth, anywhere on earth. Okay? So restrain yourself. And if you're already having sex with your partner and you're not married and you kind of thinking that this is wrong, I'm telling you, stop. If your partner protests, explain it to them. If they continue to insist, dump them. Because if they don't respect your point of view, if they don't respect what you believe in and what's important to you, if they don't respect it now while you're dating, what do you think they're going to do 5 years from now when you're married? And it's just that you deserve better. Whether you're a male or you're a female, you deserve better. Okay. Again, hearing God, though, if you're having sex with someone, hearing God, whether they're the right one or not, is almost impossible. Okay, back to my former girlfriend. She was wonderful. She was beautiful. She was mature. She was stable. She had a job. She had her own house. On paper, she seemed to be perfect. She even had children the same age as my children. And we were both in love, and we both would have gotten married just like that if God had said yes, because we were in love. But he didn't say yes, and so we broke up. And then I started praying a different prayer. I asked God, how do you get to know a woman well enough to know if she is supposed to be my wife or not, if she's the one, without getting so close to her that if she's not the one, that it's going to break her heart or break my heart or break both of our hearts? And God's answer was profound. He said, Scott, you don't know yourself or your future well enough. How are you going to know hers? And I pondered that for a few days, and I just contemplated, what was he saying? And what I came to is God was saying, I don't know how to pick my own wife. I'm in my mid-40s, but I don't know how to pick my own wife. And I think, again, what he was talking about was destinies, because he was getting ready to shift my understanding of what my destiny was. And I didn't even know it. So then I said, okay, God, I get it. I don't know how to pick my wife. Let's do it the old-fashioned way. You're my Father in heaven, and whoever I'm going to marry, she's going to be a believer. So you're going to be her Father in heaven. So why don't you as my father get together with you as her father, the old-fashioned way, and why don't you guys come together and make an agreement, and I will marry whoever you show me. You just have to make it super clear, because I don't want to accidentally marry the wrong person. But I'll marry whoever you tell me to do. And what I didn't realize was that God was getting ready to put me on a trajectory that completely changed my course. I was, again, in my mid-40s, and over the next 15 months, he introduced me to my wife. He introduced me to my house, which we talk about in another episode, and to my new calling, which was mold illness. And each one of these was done in a divine, unbelievable, miraculous, fantastic kind of way. So I took that to heart. I said, God, I'll marry whoever you want. I stopped dating. Over this next 6 months, I didn't flirt with anyone. And I was working in a pediatric office. There were a lot of single moms that came in. A lot of them were very attractive, and a lot of them were flirting with me, but I didn't flirt back. I had people calling me. I had no fewer than 6 indecent proposals. I said no to all of them. And when I would preach at church, the front 2 rows would be filled with mostly divorced single women who were there hoping to catch my eye. I know that sounds arrogant. It's the truth. So I went about 6 months like that without entertaining any kind of things. And I was getting ready to go to my 3rd trip to Nigeria. And it was going to be a real short trip. I was going to preach once. I was going to I was going to be the best man in my host's wedding. The host is the one who takes me. I sleep with his in his place, and he takes me to the different churches that we preach at and stuff like that. But he was getting married, and he asked me to be his best man. So 3 weeks before I was supposed to go on that trip, I had a very clear dream. And I don't get dreams very often at that point, like once every 5 years or so. And in that dream, I saw my wife, and she was clearly African, and we were in the African plain, and she was pregnant with my son. And I knew it was my son in the dream. And I also knew that because I don't believe in having sex before marriage and I practice what I preach, that she must have been my wife already if she was pregnant with my son. So I woke up right after the dream. I called my Nigerian host and I said, I'm coming in 3 weeks. He said, yeah. I said, I'm going to meet my wife when I get there. I'm going to meet my wife. And as I flew to Nigeria 3 weeks later, I heard that voice of God, the same one that said that the previous wonderful lady was not the one for me. I heard him say that I was going to meet someone. And the story is really crazy, and I could really talk about it for an hour, but I won't. So many crazy things happen, so many God things happen, that it deserves an entire book. But I was the best man, and it turned out that my wife, who I met at the wedding, she was the best lady, what we would call the maiden of honor. So let's just say that my host got married, but the best man got the best lady. And we were married in Africa 1 year later. I had to travel 8,500 miles to meet the perfect wife for me. But I did, and I was obedient to God, and I waited on him, and he introduced me to the perfect wife for me. And my wife has been known to say that I'm the perfect husband for her. Now, we got married 15 years ago. We had 5 children in the next 6 years to add to my previous 3 wonderful children. And they're all grown now. But I'm so thankful to God to bring me such a precious, awesome woman of faith. And still I can say 15 years later, she is still the perfect wife for me. So all glory to God. Isn't he good? Isn't that an amazing story? That's an amazing story. Now, every episode of Medicine and Miracles, we try to bring you a moment of hope, something uplifting. And this week it comes from the Bible, from Psalms chapter 24, verse 1, and I'll read it to you. The earth is the Lord's and all its fullness, the world and all those who dwell therein. In other words, God owns everything. He created everything. He owns everything. The whole earth and everything in it belongs to God. It's all his. Anything I need, he has. There is no lack in his kingdom. All the resources of heaven and earth are at his fingertips. And anything I need, anything you need, he has. Anything. Everything. It's all available. And God loves to give. And that is so encouraging to me. Well, that's it for today. And thank you again for joining us. If you liked what you saw, if you learned something new, hit the like and subscribe buttons. It helps our channel. Join us again for our next episode of Medicine and Miracles, where we find that the mysteries of the human body, they're intersecting with the unsearchable God. This is Dr. Scott McMahon. Thank you so much, and God bless you. Goodbye.